The morning of September 12th, 1931, opened on Ashford with a stained gray sky and an air thick with portent. Ephraim Vance, undertaker by trade and devoted keeper of quiet ordinance Baptist faith, moved through his preparations in reverent silence. His chapel sat at the edge of a town that seemed more brittle with each passing week, where whispers traveled faster than the wind, and eyes lingered longer in suspicion than in greeting. Ephraim believed in order, a divine symmetry in life and death, preserved through his work and fortified by Scripture. He had seen grief wear many masks, but lately, Ashford wrapped itself in hysteria disguised as mourning. The town's ancient stones and sagging timber houses seemed to watch, leaning closer each day. The churchyard cemetery, which he tended with monastic devotion, bordered the edge of long abandoned rail lines that snaked into the southern hills. Townsfolk avoided speaking of the old railway tunnel just beyond the rise, swallowed by thicket and ivy. It was there, rumors said, that the Marchant expedition, a trio of young archaeologists from Boston, vanished 2 weeks prior. The official word was silence. Deputy Harrow would only grunt when asked, but Ephraim had overheard the Redford sisters declaring that the team had gone to seek buried relics, Roman or older, beneath the hills. What they found, no one would say. No word, no bodies, not a single artifact returned. In the week that followed the disappearance, Ashford began to tremble. Children woke screaming of dry voices under their beds. Wells drew up sand. The freshly dead would not keep, their bodies spoiled too fast, their eyes wide in the coffin lids. Ephraim spent longer in sermon and deeper with his prayers. He began to have visions in the pale hours before dawn. Dreams cloaked in smoke, a tunnel with ribs of glistening stone, and among the veils of shadow, something stood, a figure tall and faceless, holding a crooked black candle that shed no light. Whether divine warning or madness creeping in, Ephraim could not say. But something godless had been stirred, and he would not let it fester. Under the ruse of expanding the cemetery grounds toward the south ridge, Ephraim acquired a surveying permit to work by the old tunnel. By lantern light and beneath the watchful stars of a cooling autumn, he would go alone. Scripture in one pocket, consecrated soil in the other. Ashford feared devils in stories and darkness in old wives' tales. But true evil, Ephraim told himself, wore the mask of forgotten things, the things buried deeper than graves. He stood at the tunnel's mouth that evening, the earth at his boots damp and sucking like breath. The silence was total. He crossed himself once, then stepped inside. The sun hung low over Ashford as Ephraim Vance shouldered his spade and made toward the railway tunnel, the air sour with decay. To the curious, he claimed he had old burial plots to inspect near the overgrown trackbed. But beneath his solemn expression lay a simmering urgency, a divine burden gnawed at his conscience since the expedition's vanishing. The tunnel slept beneath a veil of moss and time. Its entrance, jagged with half-collapsed stones, exhaled a suffocating chill. Trees leaned away, as though recoiling from the mouth of some unseen predator. Vance paused at the threshold, murmured a prayer in Latin, and stepped inside. What lay within unsettled even his mortician's resolve. Ash-black smudges scarred the tunnel walls, burn patterns that twisted in shapes foreign to both scripture and science. Further in, carved into soot-stained stone, strange sigils pulsed faintly in the half-light of his lantern. He squinted, hand trembling, recalling descriptions from esoteric tomes kept locked away in his private study. Serpent knots, star-bent forms, the inverted tree. He found the remnants of a circle meticulously carved into the tunnel floor, half covered with mold and rubble. At its heart, atop petrified wax drippings, sat a warped black candle, half melted and utterly scorched, as though it had once hosted flames not born of this world. A sulphurous scent hung in the air, despite the cold. Kneeling, Vance reached for it. The moment his fingers brushed the edge of the wax, his surroundings melted away. He stood not in the tunnel, but in a space untouched by time, black as pitch but brimming with soundless whispers. Shapes circled just beyond vision, tall, fluid, flickering like flame yet casting no heat or light. Their murmurs were soft but pressing, like words shouted through cotton soaked in oil. They spoke of eternal hunger, of ancient names not meant for mortal breath. Vance clasped his crucifix tight, whispering psalms as he staggered backward, but the symbols rewrote themselves behind his eyes. When he blinked, the tunnel returned. Gouges ripped across the walls, as if some clawed thing had protested its banishment. The black candle still sat in his palm, now warm. He stuffed it into a cloth and turned to leave, boots crunching over dry bones, small and brittle. Back in his chapel later that night, by candlelight and trembling hand, Vance tried to sketch the symbols that haunted him. The drawings took shape of their own will, his pen guided by some errant force. What warlock had summoned this darkness? What prayers would suffice against such blasphemy? The candle had not merely survived. The flame had spoken. And Ephraim, for all his faith, had listened. Ashford's mystery was no longer absence. It was warning. And he had heard its hiss. Ashford festered like an open wound. The fog thickened with each passing dusk, and with it came the murmurs, not of mouths, but of something deeper. Ephraim Vance gazed across the town square from his window above the chapel mortuary, watching knots of townsfolk bicker in hushed, desperate tones. At the grocer's, a woman screamed at a man for inviting the voice into her child. At the altar that Sunday, 2 elders accused the pastor of speaking with a black tongue, forcing his abrupt collapse. The town was unraveling. Whispers reached Ephraim in the night. Long after prayer extinguished the last of his courage, soft chants teased the corners of his mind. Though fervent in his faith, he could not banish what he'd seen deep within the railway tunnel. The broken circle of salt, the wax-dripping censer, and that malformed candle stub. Impossibly dark, still sticky with tallow as though recently extinguished. Through old church folios and forbidden entries his own order had long tried to erase, Vance began piecing together a grim possibility. The black candle was not the beginning. It was an echo. In 1796, Ashford's western hills were the exile site of Albrecht Marlowe, a disgraced theologian turned occultist. Whispers in surviving accounts named him a shadow born, not a son born of man and woman, but sired under a blood moon, shaped from sin and spoken oaths. Marlowe's rites summoned not fire nor demon, but voice, pure, ravenous voice, and it had returned. Children began to speak in unplaceable tongues by day, and shiver and sob in sleep by night. Ephraim visited the ancient cemetery known as Temperance Hollow under a harvest moon, where moss-covered headstones leaned like drunken pennants. Within the eldest crypt, he found what he did not seek. Beneath a hidden floor was a prayer, not to God, but to silence. Scrawled in rusted Latin, it claimed that Marlowe's tongue had been bound not by death, but by belief, that a faithful soul, willing and untainted, could create a final seal beneath the earth. But it required more than prayer. It asked for devotion, spirit, and extinguishment. In the marketplace, tensions gave way to torches. Flocks confronted neighbors. A boy was burned for speaking the same words Ephraim had once heard in a dream. A barmaid was dragged to the lich gate, then spared at the last moment. Her accuser, eyes wide with epiphany, fell to his knees repeating, "He's in the walls." Ephraim stood amidst this fracturing with aching clarity. The black candle was a relic of a pact long broken, a wick from an ancient mouth. The warlock whispered still, fed by darkness and doubt. He knew then. Faith alone could not lock it away. Action, pure and selfless, was the final hymn. With trembling hands, he retrieved the candle and the bone-carved crucifix. In prayer, he burned below the eyes of saints, preparing for one final descent into the tunnel, where silence and sin vied for his soul. The tempest struck Ashford with biblical wrath. Rain hammered slate rooftops as winds howled down crooked alleys. Yet Ephraim Vance walked undeterred, shrouded in his mourning cloak. Midnight hung about him like a second skin. He clutched the black candle, now cold and cracked, its wax etched with runes no tongue should utter. His path led toward the old railway tunnel, where time twisted and light dared not linger. Lightning arced above as he reached the mouth of the tunnel. The storm roared behind him, yet within lay a deeper silence, oppressive and charged. He stepped into the waiting dark, boots echoing in rhythm with unseen heartbeats. His passage stirred nothing save the trembling of old bones buried in the walls. Deep within, beyond the symbols carved in ash and blood, a chamber had opened. Unnatural, cyclopean in scale. Glyphs pulsed faintly on the stone. He struck a match. The flicker fled the wick once, then caught. A thin emerald flame danced atop the black candle. The ritual had begun. Whispers erupted, slithering utterances from behind reality's veil. The warlock emerged, not a man, but folded shadow layered in screaming scripture. No features, yet a gaze that cleaved conscience. The air bent around its form as it spoke without sound, offering delusions of truth, mocking faith's trembling candle. Ephraim steeled his soul, grasping his worn Bible with white knuckles. He knelt before the flame and recited the rite etched in the crumbling manuscript he'd taken from the vicar's vault. His voice wavered only once, at the line that surrendered what lay eternal. "I give this vessel, unworthy but devout. Let his boundary bind thee. May the flame consume the shadow and cleanse the earth beneath." A brilliant flare engulfed the candle. Screams, too many for one voice, pierced the dark. The warlock shrieked in rage and fear, its form buckling like smoke in a storm wind. Tendrils lashed out but found no purchase. Ephraim held firm even as his outline blurred, blood dripping from his nose and mouth. The last scene were his eyes, fixed on the heavens beyond the stone. Then silence. The candle's flame winked out. Come morning, the storm had passed. Ashford woke as if from a fevered dream. No whispers echoed. No hysteria quaked through cobbled streets. Searchers found no sign of Ephraim Vance. Only his tools, reverently arrayed beside the melted stub of the black candle, now inert. Some say peace came at a terrible price. Others whisper that he lingers beneath Ashford still, keeping watch by faith alone. The tunnel remains sealed, yet late at night, when the wind stirs just so, a faint scent of wax and myrrh can still be felt, accompanied by a warmth that does not belong to this world.